Hello and welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the video version. And this is a podcast done by me, a captain for a major U.S. legacy carrier here in the United States. And again, if you're interested in listening to the podcast and not watching it on the YouTube video, head over to airlinepilotguy.com. And there you can find out how to subscribe to the podcast via iTunes, which is the way most people listen to the show, and other ways to consume this content. And if you're interested in seeing the show notes for this episode, head over to airlinepilotguy.com/126. Sit back and relax. Enjoy me recording the audio version of episode 126. Here we go. Just realized that I need to say what episode this is first. So let me try it again. Take two. Airline Pilot Guy, episode 126.
Flight 209er, you're clear for takeoff. Roger. LA, good morning. 123.9. Roger. Request detected.
Hello, you're listening to the Airline Pilot Guy Show, the view from my side of the cockpit door. I'm Captain Jeff, your host, broadcasting live from Studio 527 in the Comfort Suites Hotel in Buffalo, New York. In this episode, we're going to talk about of course, just breaking news. A plane, Malaysian Flight 17, has been shot down, they think, as it flew over Ukraine. Some TSA news, the Farnborough Airshow going on this week, and much more. So sit back and relax, get all settled in, tray tables and seatbacks in their upright and locked positions, electronic devices powered on. Flight 126 is ready for pushback. Well, hello, everybody, and again, welcome to the Airline Pilot Guy Show. And again, I'm Jeff Nielsen, Captain Jeff, also known as. And just wanted to say that I am on a 4-day trip yet again. And it is Thursday, so I started on Tuesday. The first night we were in... Where were we? It's funny, you know, it was only a couple days ago and I've already forgotten. Oh, Portland, Maine. How could I forget? Going into Portland, rather stormy that day, going into Portland, Maine. Did I say Oregon? I meant to say Maine. Beautiful city. And we just made it to the airport and landed before a very, very heavy round of thunderstorms, lightning, everything, heavy rain hit the airport. And because of all the stormy weather, we were stuck at the Holiday Inn, our layover hotel, for the duration of our layover. But it was great. It was one of those rare times that the entire crew got together downstairs because there was really nowhere else for us to go, and enjoyed each other's company and enjoyed a lobster roll and some local beer. And so that's where we were on Tuesday. Wednesday, yesterday, in Pensacola Beach at another Holiday Inn, a Holiday Inn resort. And here I am today in beautiful downtown Buffalo, New York. Just returned from a wonderful lunch, a little bit of a late lunch with SQPN community member and Airline Pilot Guy community member, Tiffany. And we enjoyed a great lunch at the Pearl Street Grill and Brewery, and enjoyed a Lake Effect American Pale Ale. I believe she had the cherry wheat or something like that. So, and good food. Had some soup and onion rings. Yeah, not a very well balanced lunch, but that's okay. Had a great time, a great conversation with Tiffany. So, thanks again, Tiffany, for meeting up with me here in Buffalo. And so here I am now, a little bit later in the afternoon. And actually, it's getting close to early evening and time for recording this week's episode. Now, as I mentioned at the beginning, well, before I talk about the Malaysian flight, let me talk about some other items. Let's see. Just started, and I don't know how all of you figured it out already, but I already have several of you following me on my new Twitter ID, which is what I'm going to use exclusively for letting people know my location. And it is at Where is Captain Jeff? That's the @ sign where, WHERE, is Captain, CAPT, Jeff. And I'm going to use that one specifically, not for doing any other kind of tweet, but just to broadcast my location. So using Foursquare to send the tweet, kind of connected to that particular Twitter account. So if you're interested, and I meant to play this too. Wow, I should have been to rehearsal today, and I missed it apparently. So
1, 2, 3,
I don't know if you people remembered this game show on TV. My kids used to watch it.
Well, she sneaks around the world. Get to Carolina. She's a sticky finger filter from Berlin down to Belize. She'll take you for a ride on the boat to China. Tell me where in the world is
Captain Jeff. That's the best I could do. That was actually Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, but I thought it'd be kind of clever to use for Where in the World is Captain Jeff. Again, you can follow me on Twitter at Where is Captain Jeff. That's CAPTJEFF. So there you go. Just wanted to let you know. And hopefully that will be the best way for you to figure out where I am, keep track of my locations. And hey, if you happen to be around where I am, you can contact me by sending me an email to feedback@airlinepilotguy, and perhaps we could meet up for a beer or something. All right, now let's get to the next thing on my agenda, which of course is the Coffee Fund. And let's be serenaded by the Ink Spots, Java Jive, recorded in 1940.
I love coffee, I love tea, I love the Java Jive and it loves me.
Coffee and tea and the Java and me, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup, a cup. All right, so the Coffee Fund is a way for you to become more involved in the show by helping me financially, provide me with my favorite caffeine delivery system, which is coffee. Of course, more importantly, it's used to help offset some of the costs of doing the podcast. Web hosting costs, media server costs, all kinds of costs associated. But hey, don't worry about it. If you're kind of strapped, you have a tight budget, I don't want your money. If you're a student out there trying to save up money for flying lessons, I certainly don't want your money either. So if you're out there and you have a couple extra bucks in your pocket and you want to kind of support the show, then head over to airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. And since our last episode, the classic Airline Pilot Guy Coffee Fund PayPal method, we have Kenneth, Todd, Darren, and Robert, or Robert, not sure. And via the Patreon method of supporting me, you can become a patron of the Airline Pilot Guy Show. Father Corey Stika. Did I get that right, Father? I think I did. So check it out. Again, more info about the Coffee Fund at airlinepilotguy.com/coffee. I do love Java. Sweet and hot. All right. That's enough of the ink spots. Thank you, guys. And now, finally, on to the news. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show here, and I have the TV on in my hotel room with one of the cable news network channels on, and they're doing their almost nonstop coverage now of the tragedy, again involving Malaysia Airlines. They can't buy a break. Malaysian Airlines, this time flight number 17, crashed, and apparently word is from several sources that it was shot down as it flew near airspace deemed unsafe for passenger jets over the Ukraine area. You'll remember that the Ukraine and Russia are kind of at war there, and they were flying above that area. Let's see, an advisor to the Ukrainian Interior Ministry told the Interfax news agency that the Boeing 777 was brought down by a Buk, which is a BUK ground-to-air missile, killing all 280 passengers and 15 crew members, so 295 all totaled. The victims include 6 from the United Kingdom, as well as 154 Dutch, 38 Malaysians, and 27 Australians, with a number of Americans also feared dead. Plumes of thick black smoke could be seen rising high into the air near the village of Grabavo, Donetsk. And the plane, which one eyewitness said split in two on impact, is almost unrecognizable in pictures of the crash site, with burning wreckage scattered across a vast area. A spokesman for Malaysia Airlines, still reeling from the loss of Flight 370 in March, said the plane disappeared from radar as it flew over Ukrainian airspace. Officials in Kiev were quick to deny any involvement with Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, lamenting what he called an act of terrorism. In Moscow, one reporter said that Igor Strelkov, the commander of the pro-Russian Donetsk People's Republic, appeared to have boasted about the incident on social media. In one deleted message that was recovered by Sky News, he allegedly wrote, quote, "We warned you not to fly over our sky." But apparently that message was deleted, but it has been recovered. Remember out there, anything you put on the internet, whether you delete it or not, it can still be recovered. So be careful. Okay, so they're arguing there, the separatists and Ukrainian forces as well as Russian forces are all arguing and pointing the finger at the other guy or guys. And so I'm sure we're going to find out more about this tragedy as time goes on. But it's not the first time this week, in fact, that an airplane has been shot down. In fact, let me pull up this news article. On Monday of this week, the 14th, a Ukrainian military transport plane, I think it was an Antonov 26, was shot down along the eastern border with Russia. All 8 people aboard that airplane managed to bail out safely. Separatist rebels claim responsibility for downing that Antonov 26, but Ukrainian officials swiftly ruled that out and blame Russia instead. Let's see, just a couple days later, yesterday, the 16th, right? That was yesterday, I believe. Yeah, a Ukrainian Air Force fighter jet, a Sukhoi 25, was shot down by a missile fired from a Russian plane, according to Ukraine's Security Council. The pilot of the Sukhoi 25 is forced to bail out after his plane was hit. Not sure if he made it or not. And then, of course, today, the tragedy of the downed civilian airliner, the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. Again, we will, of course, be talking about this more. And so make sure you tune in to next week's episode 127, where I'm sure we'll be able to fill in more of the blanks for this tragedy. Okay, moving on. Let's see. I wanted to talk about Farnborough International Air Show, which is a week-long event that combines a major trade exhibition for the aerospace and defense industries with a public air show. The event is held in mid-July in even-numbered years, which is, of course, we're in an even-numbered year, 2014, and it's held at the Farnborough Airport in Hampshire, England. The first 5 days, Monday through Friday, are dedicated exclusively to trade, with the final 2 days open to the public. The air show is an important event in the international aerospace and defense industry calendar, providing an opportunity to demonstrate civilian and military aircraft to potential customers and investors. The show is also used for the announcement of new developments and orders and to attract media coverage. Now, I'm thinking, Farnborough, hey, I know somebody over there who not only lives close by but actually works at the airport. He's an air traffic controller at Farnborough. And so I dialed up my good friend and fellow podcaster. He is the host of the fantastic podcast entitled Just a Catholic Dad. And so let's listen to my interview with Sean McCarney, and it lasts about 24 minutes or so. So here we go. Well, hey, Sean, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, Jeff. It's great to be here again. How are you?
Great. He's messing with my head, which is
take two.
Which is very no. Well, this is take two, by the way. So anyway, I thought it'd be interesting this week, actually today, recording this today, the 14th of July, 2014, is the first day of the Farnborough International Air Show. Did I get that right?
That's right. Yep.
Okay, and it's a big deal. This is one of the big air shows that probably the biggest in the world, isn't it?
I think, well, the biggest air show in the world is the Royal International Air Tattoo called RIAT, which is at Fairford, RAF Fairford, near Brize Norton in Oxfordshire in the UK, which actually, although it's an RAF Fairford, it's a USAF base and used by B-52s for forward positioning when there are various flights and scraps around the world, but most of the time it's just on care and maintenance. But every year it comes to life with the biggest air show in the world. And we're quite lucky because we follow on the 2 weeks after with a bit of an overlap, the RIAT show. So we get to piggyback on the back of that with aircraft going backwards and forwards to Fairford, which is only about 15 minutes flying time away from where we are. So it all makes for a great show. But is a strange one because it's not just an air show. But RIAT is an air show where people go and be entertained by all these aircraft flying around and static displays. But Farnborough is more than that. Farnborough is more an aviation industry hoolie, meetup, bonanza, whatever, and an air show as well. So not only do we have the couple of days where the public can come in and watch all the displays happen and see some of the latest aircraft from throughout the world, but in the sort of couple of weeks leading up to it, massive amounts of business are done. Really, and in 2012, $72 billion worth of orders were placed at that air show. $72 billion. That's how big a deal it is.
Well, that's why, yeah, in my mind, it seems that as far as a world view of air shows, and I guess when you think of air shows, a lot of people think of, just the displays and, the aerial displays and the static displays and all that kind of stuff. But as you said, as far as the entire world paying attention, I think they're looking at these big aerospace companies, Airbus and Boeing and all the defense contractors out there, displaying their newest, greatest fighters and all that kind of stuff. And as you said, a lot of commerce is going on here. So that's why, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, this has got to be the biggest show. I guess in that
it had this. I think it probably is, certainly in the West. It probably goes side by side with Paris because we're biennial, not biannual. That's a different thing altogether.
Well, this is. Oh, we're not going to talk about your personal, things. Oh wait. Oh, you're talking. Once every 2 years. I got you. Okay.
Once every 2, and it swaps over the Paris Air Show, which is in France, of course.
Right.
Now, last year, the Paris Air Show was on. They didn't do too well because they were still coming out of the recession. But I think what it's showing here is the aviation industry is beginning to make quite a comeback now. And I think they're looking forward to a good show.
So you have a pretty nice view from where your office is located of the entire Farnborough airport. And
we do, yes.
Up there in the control tower there. So I would imagine that even the days leading up to the show are pretty interesting for you.
Funnily enough, for the controllers, the air show itself, the sort of 5-hour day in which the air show is going on, is probably the least challenging and the least interesting because once you've seen the display 5 or 6 times, you've seen it 5 or 6 times. But because we have restricted airspace around the airfield to protect the displays, it's actually very quiet. So when we get busy is the period before the air show starts and the period after the air show finishes, when the aircraft not only have to be repositioned around the airfield, but also the normal airport customers, the normal aircraft want to get in. And normally there's quite a queue of them to get in. So you're trying to balance landing all these aircraft coming off the airways system with trying to drag Airbus 380s across runways and things like that. That's when it gets challenging. And of course, the radar controllers downstairs are holding aircraft off in the local airspace and then trying to shoot the gap whenever they've got one to get aircraft down on the runway. So challenging and fun, it really is.
Sounds like a busy time, exciting time, leading up to and afterwards.
And sorry, Jeff, it's this Skype thing. There's always that delay, isn't there?
Don't worry about it.
We do get a great
keep
view.
talking.
We'll just keep going. Who cares? Yeah. Nobody's listening, as you say.
No, nobody's listening to this, really.
Well, we're lucky. If you ever go on the web and have a look at the airport at which I work, it's Farnborough International Air Show. Bit of a giveaway, really. Our tower is fantastic. It's a very modern-looking tower. But the crowd line is on the south of the runway. You've only got one big runway. And the crowd line and all the displays and all the booths and the tents and the static aircraft are all on the south side, and we sit on the north side of the runway. So, in fact, all the air displays themselves are going on right over our heads. We're in the tower, literally looking up, or sometimes looking sideways at these aircraft as they're flying by. Great view, and one that I think people pay a lot of money for if they could get there.
Yeah, I'll bet they would. And do you have like a skylight or a hatch that you can open up and pop your head up and look at what's going on above?
If only. That's the worst bit about being in the visual control room, in that anything happens directly above you can't actually see. So you're kind of ducking left and right. And we've got a very big visual control room. That's the glass box that sits on the top. Because just for air show, when you're going to have 7, 8 people up there all doing various jobs to keep the air show running, you know, that's not just the controllers, it's the coordinators, it's the people talking to the flying control department on the other side, the guys who are responsible for towing aircraft around the airfield. All of those people are up there. And, of course, you always get visitors. But we do have a nice balcony that runs round it where we can go and watch the airplanes fly.
Well, I'm looking at a picture of Sean and I did a recording, at least we were talking about it before we hit the record button on this interview, 2 or 3 years ago, one of my old Catholic pilot episodes, and unfortunately, I think it's one of those that is missing from, I deleted. So, but anyway, in the post on the Catholic Pilot Show, I put a picture of the Farnborough tower, and it's very modern, very, very beautiful tower. And I can see that observation deck you're talking about.
Yeah. There's won a lot of design awards when they because all the hangars as well are all, they're wavy. Yeah. If you look at them, they're all designed to be wavy and sort of meld into, or mold. Yeah. Well, mind meld into the hills behind.
Well, sort of like has a very sci-fi look to it, a very futuristic look.
Well, it's been in some movies. It was in, was it Inception? I think it was in. It was in one of the James Bond films. I think the first one with Daniel Craig, Farnborough, the airport at which he goes, it's meant to be in some Far East country or whatever, is actually Farnborough Airport. So there's been quite a few movies made there and around the place because it looks so different.
Well, it's very beautiful. So what do you think? Now, I guess there's a little bit of, not controversy, as you say, regarding some of the airplanes that were supposed to be performing at the show and will not be. For instance, of course, the big one, I think, is the military F-35, what is it called? The Lightning II?
Yeah, we call it the Lightning II.
And is it going to be
showing up? They had a tough time, haven't they?
Yeah.
We don't know.
Okay.
As of when I finish work today, we don't know. It's not going to make the beginning of the show. I think they're hoping that it will make the end towards the end of this week. So the last day of the air show is on Sunday coming up. They're hoping it'll be there. But it didn't make Fairford, unfortunately. It didn't make the flyby of our brand spanking new shiny aircraft carrier that we're having built. And I don't know whether it'll make Farnborough or not. It'd be sad if it doesn't. Yeah. But I think I've got a quote here from somebody from Lockheed Martin who was, let me have a look, see if I can find it. I can't find it anyway. But anyway, basically what they were saying was, really, this is a missed opportunity because there's a big market for jets out there. And the F-35 is an expensive piece of kit. So what they don't want is the embarrassment of it not turning up because it's broken with a problem they don't know how to fix. But it would be nice if it does turn up, I have to say. We've got 20 23 different flying displays, I think, ranging from sort of First World War warbirds. There's a Great War display where they dogfight around the sky. We've got F-18s, F-16s from the US. We've got Harriers. Of course, we don't have any Harriers anymore. They've all been pensioned off. But we've got Spanish Harriers coming in, various other things, loads of civil aircraft. When I left today, there were 2 displays. One that I just missed was Airbus 380, the Super Jumbo. And I saw that last year, and that's amazing to see that thrown around the sky. You just, it doesn't look natural, really.
Yeah, something that
big.
big.
Looks so impressive.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
it's a very unnatural looking airplane. In fact, I think it's kind of ugly.
It is kind of ugly, yeah. And it's the size of it that gets me. We were watching it come in yesterday into our runway. Now, we've got a very long runway, but we normally don't use most of it because the kind of aircraft we fly, we don't need the whole length. But when we run up for the air show, we open up the entire length of the runway. And I was looking at this thing on final approach, and you just thought, that's just enormous. How can that fly?
I know.
But we also saw the Airbus 350 was displaying when I left, which is the new Airbus model. It's kind of meant to match the 787. Airbus is after the 787, but it's bigger. I think it goes about 440 to 550 passengers, which is sort of more Boeing 777 size, really. But that was being thrown around the sky, and that was, again, stunning to see. The jets are great. I'm ex-military, so I love watching jets, fighter jets. But to see these airliners being put through their paces is jaw-dropping, I think.
Yeah, they really fly them kind of outside or getting close to the edge of the envelope of those airplanes. So,
what about the MD-11, Jeff? What do you think?
Excuse me?
What about the MD-11 being thrown around like that? That would do well.
MD-11. I don't think so. Or you're talking about the airplane that I fly, the MD-88,
MD-88
or the MD-90.
sorry.
Yeah,
yes, MD-88.
I would like to try it, but I think I get in a little bit of trouble. Speaking of flying displays, I did a search on YouTube for Farnborough 2014, and one of the videos that came up was the Airbus military M400.
Yeah.
The propeller.
That was displaying as...
Yeah, go ahead.
That's it. Yeah, that was displaying just after I left. And it's kind of a midway between the Charlie 130 and the C-17. It's kind of a hybrid between the two. Meant to be very good, but about 20 years late, obviously, because that's the way we do things in Europe.
Yeah.
But the display was apparently quite good, so I'll have a look at that tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know if this was actually filmed, like right at Farnborough, like within the past couple of days or not, or maybe it was a practice run or whatever. But it almost, and it's hard for me to tell based on the camera angle, and there's no really reference once the camera is pointed in the air at this thing. But it almost looked to me like the thing took off and almost did like an Immelman, like a half loop and then rolling out, which was, I was amazed. I'm thinking that thing is like upside down. That was impressive.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just the angle of the video camera. I don't know, but anyway, it looks like
I'll let you know.
Pretty impressive. Yeah, let me know how that show goes.
It's meant to be very maneuverable. What it could have been, leading up to the air show, for the week leading up, every participant in that air show, every aircraft that's going to put its display on, has to validate. And this happens at every air show throughout the world, in that the aircraft has to turn up, and the pilots who are going to fly it during the display have to turn up and do the display as they would if the crowd were there. And the Flying Control Committee, or whatever the name for it is locally, then has to approve that display for safety purposes. So what probably happened is over the last week when we've been doing these validations, they're called, is people have filmed it, which is quite fine because they're standing on the airfield perimeter with video cameras. But I suspect that's what you've seen on the internet. Interesting.
Okay, well, I'll put that video in the show notes for my listeners to view at their leisure. The other thing I was going to mention about the show is in this article I'm reading said that there was a little snafu for some of the Russians that were supposed to be attending this year, something to do with visas being held up or something. It looks like a little bit of a political issue going on, but I don't know if you know anything about that.
I don't. I mean, I know about the same as you. I know that because of there's a wasp just going around my head. Sorry about that.
Okay. I thought, I think I just
Crimea,
lost you.
Yeah, keep away from me. I hate that when something goes around the back of your neck. I sit with my fly spray. Yeah, because the Crimea, I think the
yeah.
visas have been withheld by the UK government to some Russian officials, I believe. But as you say, it's politics. And I think the Chinese, I think, aren't displaying anything this year. They were going to bring something over, but aren't. But I think that's more to do with a shift in emphasis in China towards their homegrown aviation industry first, rather than spreading out. I think that's it. But I mean, I'm looking at the figures here, which I've picked up as well. Last year, 110,000 trade visitors, 100,000 public visitors, 1,500 exhibitors on show, 70 aircraft on static display, 23 flying. It's a big deal, I think, to be there. I think one of the guys was interviewed the day said, to have to go to Farnborough every year may well be a pain in the butt. But the more important point is if you're not there, it can be costly and embarrassing. I think the movers and shakers in the sort of the military aviation world and the civil aviation world needs to be a place like Farnborough because it's where the little things happen as well. It's not just the big planes being wheeled out. It's the smaller technologies that become bigger technologies 5-10 years down the line. This is where they first appear.
It's the place to be, and if you're not there, then you're probably going to lose. So, yeah, that's looking at these huge orders that some of these, Airbus and Boeing are announcing, and I think I read somewhere that Emirates just put in an order for like 150 777Xs that aren't even being manufactured yet. It's just amazing. And of course, the A330 Neo, I think that they're thinking they're going to announce at Farnborough. So it's interesting to kind of watch what's going on there with the aircraft manufacturers. But so
it is, yeah.
I'm glad that you were here to kind of give us a firsthand experiential view of what is going on, at least at the very, very beginning of the show. Perhaps I can get back with you again at some later time, and we can talk about what you thought about the whole show.
That'd be great. And of course, like we said earlier, I've got some podcasts dating back about 2 years ago, I think, or 3 years ago, where I did like an air show diary for a couple of 1 year over about 5 days, I think it was. That's quite interesting to go back and listen to.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how well you want to sleep that night, obviously.
Well, hey, trust me, I understand because everybody, I always get emails from people saying that they use my podcast to put their children to sleep and to help them go to sleep. And I'm thinking, I'm going to take that as a compliment, but I just don't really think it is. But anyway, sometimes I'll actually listen to my own podcast just to make sure I didn't, mess something up with my editing. And guess what happens with me? I fall asleep too.
Well, you fall asleep.
Next morning, I'm thinking, okay, that 2.5 hours, just like I didn't hear any of it because I was sleeping the whole time.
It must have been great, though.
It must have been. Well, anyway, so Sean, you'll give me those episode numbers, hopefully, and then I can put those in the show notes as well. Sean, as he just alluded to, is, and you've heard me mention Sean McCarney before, the UK Catholic Controller. He does a fantastic podcast called Just a Catholic Dad, and it's still going strong. In fact, you just put out episode number 125, I believe.
I did. 125 went out last week. Hopefully 126 will be recorded Wednesday morning, I hope, before I go to work. So fingers crossed.
Interestingly, I just put out episode number 125, and our interview that we're doing right now is going to be on episode 126. So we're exactly in sync.
Spooky.
Yeah, it is. Of course, that doesn't count all my Catholic Pilot episodes, most of which are missing forever. But before I let you go, I had to ask you about something that many of my listeners were very interested in because they sent me scads of emails and text messages and Twitters and everything else about this incident that occurred in Barcelona a week or two ago where it appeared, at least on the video, that these two airplanes got, just breathtakingly close. And then one had to go around the UT Air or Ute Air, or what do you call that? UT Air?
Something like that, wasn't it?
Yeah, the Russian 767 captain initiated a go-around because the Argentinian Airbus 340 was crossing the runway. And I thought, you know what? I don't often get the chance to actually have a real air traffic controller on the show to answer questions like this, so I thought I'd take the opportunity to do that. And so what do you think about that whole incident, or what you know about it anyway?
I know probably just as much as anybody else does from seeing the video. And At first glance, yeah, it does look quite interesting, very interesting. But I think we talked before we came on, didn't we, Jeff, about this? And first of all, I'm always very wary about photograph or video nowadays without any other form of backup evidence, because with telephoto lenses today, things can often look a lot more scary than they actually are. I was saying, we about every year or so during the holiday season, somebody will sit in one of the stacks around London before going into Heathrow, and they'll take a photo out of the window with their telephoto lens of another aircraft in the stack above them or below them. And it will look, when put on the front page of a national newspaper, like it was a shocking near miss with thousands of people potentially killed. And yet, when you actually look at the recordings, and of course they always are, if something like that appears in the press, somebody's going to look at the recordings, you see that no such thing has happened. It's just a standard separation. They're closer together because they're in a stack, but they're still separated. And people's telephoto lenses just compress that distance between them.
Mm-hmm.
But, I mean, I heard you discussing this on your show the other week. And from a safety perspective, you know, the pilot of the aircraft on final did exactly what he was trained to do. He initiated a go-round and went around. There was no sign of the undercarriage, you know, making rubber marks on the top of the fuselage of the SkyTeam aircraft crossing the runway. So I think it's more a case of, yeah, there was a go-round, but what was the reason for that go-round? And were there any of the factors involved? You know, was it just the SkyTeam pilot who crossed incorrectly? Was it that something else happened? Mm-hmm. And I doubt we, as the general public, will actually get to know about that.
Probably not. But the point is well made, I think, by you and myself that whatever happened there, whoever made a mistake, if there was a mistake made, the correct decision was made by the captain of the 767 to initiate the go-around, and it was a happy ending. I mean, that's just the way it's supposed to work, you know?
And, of course, there's no audio track either. There's no RT, radio telephony recording to go with it to give more information about what happened to that. But I know in the UK, a runway incursion such as this would be taken extremely seriously. And I read some of the newspaper reports. I think one guy said, oh, well, nobody's complained. Well, if that happened in the UK, it wouldn't actually matter whether anybody of the other two pilots concerned complained. You know, it would be subject to a mandatory occurrence report. It would go to our FAA equivalent, the CAA. There'd be a serious investigation into it. You know, we would want to find out what caused that incident to happen in the first place. And I think the great thing about the air traffic industry, certainly in the UK, and I think it may be the same in the States, I don't know, I suspect it is we're very much into a, not no blame culture, it's called a just culture. And the idea is then we're all human beings, we all make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. And if you're going to make a mistake, first of all, own up to it, because that's the only way lessons can be learned. But secondly, if something does happen, you have a thorough investigation, not to blame somebody, not to say, right, it was your fault, you're fired, but to find out what the causal factors, because these things never have one causal factor. There's always something else that adds to that, to build that situation up. We call it the Swiss cheese effect in the UK, which basically is like a Swiss cheese has got holes in it. And all that happens is everything that happens leading up to that thing is another hole in the Swiss cheese. And all they've got to do is line up and the incident happens. You know, one of those Swiss cheese slices not being there might have prevented it. So certainly we in the UK would be looking into this quite seriously, and I guarantee the CA would be talking to most airfields and operators saying, right, this is what happened, this is what you need to do about your procedures, this is what you need to look at, and to try to stop that happening again. But of course, that's the UK. Not quite so sure about what happens in Spain, I have to say.
Yeah, and you're right. That's the same kind of system that we have here in the United States. It's just like, what can we learn from this and keep it from happening again? So, well, fantastic. Again, Sean McCarney, he is just a Catholic dad. He's actually more than just a Catholic dad, but he has a fantastic show. You need to listen to it. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. Thanks, Sean, for coming on and taking some of your precious time at home to join me in this little quick interview, and it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Yeah, and same here, Jeff. It's lovely to talk to you again.
All right.
And if anybody's watching on the YouTube tomorrow, look at the tower. See a guy with a red shirt on, I'll give you a wave.
Okay, we'll be looking for you.
I think I'm stuck in radar tomorrow, actually, I have to say. The air show you see there is the noise of the tower rumbling.
We'll just pretend that the guy in the red shirt that we see waving at us is you.
Exactly.
Okay. Take care, Sean.
Cheers, Jeff.
Thanks again, Sean, for taking the time on Monday, early afternoon for me, and Monday night for him to do that interview regarding the Farnborough Airshow and the episodes that to which he was referring regarding the audio journal of the air show, which I believe he recorded a couple of years ago, maybe even 4 years ago. Episodes number 7 and 11, or 7 through 11, actually. So I'll have those in the show notes if you want to check them out. And again, an outstanding podcast entitled Just a Catholic Dad. And I hope to, as I mentioned in the interview, have another conversation with Sean later on after things have settled a bit, and maybe we can hear a little bit more about the air show and what he thought was the biggest impact and the most interesting stuff going on there. All right, let's move on by doing this. Longtime listeners will recognize that as the music that I usually use when I talk about the TSA, especially when the TSA is, not at top performance. And saw this or heard about this story just, yesterday, maybe? In Orlando, it's something that most students learn in elementary school. The United States is made up of how many states? I'm sorry, did you say how many? 50? Yes, you're correct. Plus one district, the District of Columbia. We refer to it as D.C., and then that city that everybody knows well in the District of Columbia happens to be our nation's capital, Washington, D.C., which stands for District of Columbia. And apparently, local Orlando Channel 9's Justin Gray found out that it's a lesson that an Orlando agent with the Transportation Safety Administration seems to have missed. Gray, who lives in Washington, was flying out of Orlando International Airport when a TSA agent said that Gray's District of Columbia driver's license wasn't a valid form of identification. Gray said his license is legal and up to date, but the TSA agent didn't seem to know that the District of Columbia is part of the United States. And apparently they figured the whole thing out, and Gray was allowed to continue on, but he stopped by and talked to the TSA supervisor at the time and said, you might want to let people know that the District of Columbia is part of the United States. There you go. Moving on with TSA news. Let's see. Apparently, traveling with identification is only for American citizens these days, since illegal aliens are now permitted to fly on commercial airlines without any valid identification. The National Border Patrol Council, the NBPC, say that all they need is a, quote, notice to appear form, and they are free to fly wherever they please. No questions asked. And this is a quote from spokesman Hector Garza of the NBPC. Again, that's the National Border Patrol Council. This is not the Customs and Border Protection or other federal agency renting or leasing an aircraft. These are the same planes that the American public use for domestic travel. This just adds insult to injury. Not only are we releasing unknown illegal aliens onto American streets, but we are allowing them to travel commercially using paperwork that could be easily reproduced or manipulated on any home computer. The notice to appear form has no photo. Anyone can make one and manipulate one. They do not have any security features, no watermark, nothing. They are simply printed on standard copy paper based on the information that the illegal alien says is the truth. Garza, again the spokesman for NBPC, says, "We do not know who these people are. We often have to rely solely on who they say they are. where they say they come from, or came from, and the history they say they have. We know nothing about most of them. ICE releases them into the American public, and now they are boarding aircraft at will with a simple paper document that anyone can easily alter or reproduce themselves. If these statements aren't astonishing enough, the article goes on, don't worry, there's more. Let's see, the National Border Patrol Council adamantly opposes the decision of DHS to release the illegal aliens who have been transported from the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector. Let's see, what did I want to talk about here? Let me find that part of the article that I wanted to highlight. Well, I tell you what, I'll have a link to this article in the show notes. I hope this is not really true, that illegal aliens can just board any airplane with just a simple piece of paper that, again, as the spokesperson says, can be easily reproduced by any home computer and printed on a home printer. All right, and then finally, let's round it out with our third item from the TSA. You may have heard about this, a big announcement by the Transportation Security Administration last Sunday that on certain overseas flights to the United States, it will not permit powerless devices, cell phones, and computers that cannot be turned on. Airport security officers may ask passengers to power on devices during security screening, which could mean slower security lines for travelers. Passengers could also be taken out of line for questioning. The TSA already sometimes asks travelers to turn on laptops, presumably to determine if they are real rather than filled with explosives. It's unclear how the TSA plans to deal with passengers without chargers whose devices are dead. The announcement doesn't say what will happen to a phone that can't be turned on or how the owner will retrieve it if it's confiscated by the airport security folks. Apparently, there has been some information that the security folks have received that there are people who have figured out how to make smartphones and laptop devices, etc., with bombs inside them appear to be real smartphones and real laptops. So, yeah. So just be forewarned that if you are traveling overseas and while you're trying to return to the United States, make sure that your laptop, your tablet, and your smartphone, all of them are all fully charged. The batteries are fully charged so that they're not confiscated. I warned you. All right. And finally, in the news, United 777 diverts to a remote Pacific island after burning smell reported. Let's see. The United Boeing 777 apparently had some problem while on the ground in Honolulu before they departed for Guam, an 8-hour flight. And apparently there was some kind of a burning smell on the ground. And they troubleshot the issue, and they thought they had fixed it. And they launched the flight after a several-hour delay. And then about 5 hours into the flight out of Honolulu on the way to Guam, the smell returned. In the back section of the plane, alarms were going off. Then the pilot announced that the plane would be diverting to Midway. The power seemed to go out and the plane dropped precipitously. It was very scary. It shook up a lot of people, according to one of the passengers. The captain told passengers that there were electrical problems in the cockpit and that the radar had gone out. Once on the island, they diverted to Midway, which is an atoll in the middle of the Pacific. Once on the island, which is mostly deserted and holds an abandoned military base, passengers were forced to wait 6 hours in an old gymnasium on the former base until a replacement plane arrived. About 30 people who live on the island came by with food for the passengers. These people brought all the food they had to us, adding that people were very grateful for the effort. The passengers returned to Honolulu without their luggage, which was still on the airplane, stuck at Midway because they had no way to get the luggage off the airplane. So I'm not sure that this article was written on the 11th, and now it is the 17th. So I'm sure by now the luggage has been returned to the passengers. But that's pretty scary. As I mentioned before on this show, people have asked me what scares me the most about flying, and I said, fire, anything to do with something burning, something on fire in an airplane, smoke and fire, etc., is a very frightening thing to me, especially when you're on an airplane in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. You don't have a lot of alternatives or divert locations, etc. Apparently, the pilot initially started heading back toward Honolulu, but when the smell got worse and they started seeing a haze in the back of the jet, they decided that Midway was a tad bit closer. And let's see if I still have it up. When I was preparing for this a couple days ago, I did a little bit of research about Midway, as I mentioned, an atoll in the Pacific Ocean. And for those of you who are interested in learning more about it, I'll put a link to the Wikipedia article, the free encyclopedia. The name of the airport is Henderson Field now, and the IATA identifier is MDY and ICAO PMDY. It's a public airport located on Sand Island in the Midway Atoll, an unincorporated territory of the United States. The airport is used as an emergency diversion point for ETOPS operations. It still serves in this capacity. So many flights have diverted there in the past several years. The airport has one runway. It is 7,800 feet long, or 2,377 meters. It's asphalt. So if you want to learn more about Henderson Field on the little atoll called Midway, or Midway Island, a lot of people refer to it as. And so there we have it. So, and I thought that atoll was pronounced atoll, but just to be sure, I looked it up.
Atoll.
Excuse me?
Atoll.
Ah, thank you. That is according to the Macmillan Dictionary. Okay, let's move on with, let me make sure that I've covered all the news that I wanted to cover on this show. Yep, that is it. And so now we move on. Wow, this is going to be a long show, I can tell you right now. Just ending the news segment at 53 minutes. So make sure your seatbelt is securely fastened because we have a long way to go to the end of this show. So let's play our feedback soundbite.
Captain, incoming message.
First of all, we'll start off with... Oh, wait a minute. Let me go back here. Oh, I know what I need to do. I need to resort this. Hang on. A little bit of administrative action on my part. Okay, here we go. Stand by. Why is this? Here we go. Something is all messed up. I'm sorry. Oh, hang on. I'm going to pause. Okay, let's start off with David. He writes, currently listening to episode 123 and had a few questions. Now, it's not because David is behind. It's because I'm finally getting to David's feedback. He sent this to me on the 7th of July. Regarding hydraulic leaks, you mentioned that hydraulic leaks, you mentioned that ever so many flights an aircraft may need to be topped off with hydraulic fluid, engine oil, etc. Is there, on the Mad Dog anyway, one hydraulic fluid circuit for all the various systems? Or does each system, flaps, ailerons, rudder, gear, etc., have its own fluid reservoir? And so I'll answer that one first. It depends on the airplane, but I think most airplanes are set up this way, like the Mad Dog. We have two hydraulic systems, and basically the left and the right system. And the left is powered normally by the engine-driven hydraulic pump that is located on the accessory case of the number 1 or left engine, and that powers several components. And then the right engine powers the right hydraulic system with the engine-driven hydraulic pump located on the number 2 or right hand engine. And that system is about 3,000 psi, pounds per square inch, and each of those systems have their own hydraulic supply reservoirs. And the systems can also be powered by an electrically driven hydraulic pump, and also each system can power the other's system through a transfer valve. So let's say you have an engine failure and you lose your left engine, let's say. So all the components that are powered strictly by the left engine or the left engine-driven hydraulic pump can be driven by the right system pressure through this transfer valve or transfer pump. And also there is an electrical hydraulic pump on the right system that we use on the ground and for other non-normal situations. And we actually use it also in flight to help augment the pressure provided by the engine-driven pumps. And again, each system has several components on it. And on my airplane and every airplane that I've flown, there are certain components that are actually powered by or have a load shared by each hydraulic system. Now, I know some airplanes have more than 2. They might have 3 or more hydraulic systems, but I can only tell you right now what the system is like on the airplane that I fly now. So items such as critical control surfaces like the elevator and the rudder are powered or shared by can be powered independently by either system. So I don't want to go into too much detail, but the answer to your first question, David, is that each hydraulic system powers many components, and each system has its own supply. Now, you have to be careful, and this is one of the things that the abnormal or non-normal checklist will take you through. If you have a leak and you lose all the fluid in one of the systems, you have to be very careful to ensure that you don't accidentally take the wrong steps to restore that system and end up losing all of the fluid from the working system. So that has happened. So you have to be very careful and make sure that you're doing the right steps in the checklist to keep that from happening. So I hope that answered that question for you. Secondly, you played an ATIS, Automatic Terminal Information Service, recording from Birmingham that mentioned unauthorized drone activity in the area. This got me to wondering, what is the difference between a drone and a remote control model airplane? And I thought, that's a good question. So did a little bit of research for you, David, and I found this from rcflightline.com. Basic definitions, and this article says, before we get too specific, let's consider some generally agreed upon definitions of the two aircraft categories. Later on, we'll delve a bit deeper into specifics of several other aspects. According to Wikipedia, a UAV, an unmanned aerial vehicle, or sometimes referred to as a drone, is controlled autonomously or by remote control of a pilot. While remote piloting was the norm for many years, autonomous control has since become the standard method of operation. Do-it-yourself drones echo this definition, claiming that UAVs have the capacity for autonomous flight and navigation. The Academy of Model Aeronautics, the AMA, adds that drones are computer-controlled for nearly their entire flight. Apparently, as long as the autonomous system is in place and capable of functioning, the aircraft remains a UAV, regardless of whether or not the autonomous system is in use. Now, for a radio-controlled aircraft, an RC aircraft by contrast, they are controlled with a handheld radio transmitter, which communicates with a receiver aboard the aircraft. The receiver directs the aircraft's servos to move the control surfaces based on pilot input. Based on the above definitions, one could argue that failure or removal of autonomous system components would effectively regulate a UAV to RCA status. Going about it the other way, Chris Anderson of Do-It-Yourself Drones states, an RC plane becomes a UAV with the addition of an autopilot. AMA's definition is predicated on the amount of an autonomous flight per their website. Well, anyway, they go into a little bit more detail. So that's one way to look at the difference between a UAV and a radio-controlled aircraft. Again, to kind of reiterate, a UAV doesn't necessarily have to be autonomous, but it has the capability or capacity to be autonomously controlled, and it also can be controlled by somebody using a remote device, whereas a remote-controlled aircraft doesn't have any kind of autonomous nature to it. It's all controlled directly in real time by a RC pilot. Okay, you can also look at the definition between RC, radio-controlled aircraft, and UAVs or drones by their mission. Nearly everyone seems to agree that radio-controlled aircraft are operated for recreational purposes only, and so in opposition to drones, it seems like one of the generally agreed upon requirements for UAVs is that these aircraft are mission-oriented. They transport a payload or otherwise perform some sort of practical function. While such pursuits have historically been for military purposes, commercial and non-military governmental UAV application continues to expand into new sectors. Some current UAV uses include firefighting, aerial surveillance, police duties, homeland security, mapping, photography, wildlife and livestock monitoring, traffic reporting, and surveying for mineral deposits and fossil fuels. With time, it's anyone's guess as to how widespread UAV or drone use will become. So I'll have a link to this article in the show notes if you're interested in reading more about what makes them very similar and what sets them apart. And of course, that's one of the things I'm sure that the FAA will be doing when they draft this legislation for UAVs, and they'll probably be very clear as to what the difference is. But that's at least one person's perspective and point of view. And again, just to mention this great podcast put on by David Vanderhoof and Max Flight. They were also co-hosts of a great aviation podcast, the Airplane Geeks. David and Max do a podcast dealing exclusively with unmanned aerial systems, UAVs, or it's called UAV Digest, and that's at uavdigest.com for more information about their podcast. And finally, David writes, you've mentioned numerous times the system that you use for bidding and scheduling flights, and that flight attendants use a different system. Are flight attendants restricted to particular airframes and or domestic international routes, or is it up to them to decide what kind of routes they want to fly? Okay, so essentially, and I'm not sure I understand completely, but I know that when you look at a typical rotation or trip sheet of a flight attendant, and you see their names listed, and then right below the names are just a whole bunch of different letters which indicate what their qualifications are, what kind of airplanes they're qualified to work on, and whether or not they're qualified to be an onboard leader. You know, the head the purser, or the head, the lead flight attendant for a flight. And I'm not sure if all flight attendants at Acme are qualified to fly every single airplane that we fly, or if they're, I think that was my understanding, that they basically, when they go to Jet Recurrent every year, they and in their initial training, they learn how to operate the emergency devices, the emergency doors and overwing exits and all that stuff on every single airplane that we have in our fleet. And when they're bidding, they can bid whatever their seniority allows them to fly. So they can fly one trip 1 week. It could be an international 747 or 777 flight. And then the following week, they might be on a domestic trip and flying Mad Dogs and 737s or MD-90s and 757s, 760s. You get the idea. So they're not specifically trained on only one category of airplane or one type of airplane, or only domestic and only international. They have a lot more flexibility when it comes to what they can do. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you, David, as always, for listening and sending feedback. And he says, email me if you're ever on a layover again at Greenville, Spartanburg, GSP. He'll be happy to buy me a beer or 3. Great. Thanks, David. I appreciate it. John writes, I'm in the final process of making my choice of either taking the Marine Corps aviation route or taking the Air Force route. I will hope to become an airline pilot. I was just wondering if you have any insight or advice, like would the airline prefer someone who flew C-130s or C-17s over some who flew F-35s or FA-18s? In other words, prefer somebody that flew transports, or would they prefer somebody who flew fighters, or does it matter? Does it help in the hiring process being military? So, I don't really know if it matters. I'm not completely connected to the hiring process at Acme, and of course I have no idea at other airlines. And I used to know a lot about the hiring process back 25 years ago when I was going through that whole process trying to get a job with a major airline. And I thought, in the years when I was in the Air Force, I thought that having multi-engine heavy transport time was what the airlines were looking for, and realized after I was hired that at Acme at least, it didn't matter to them. The thing that mattered most to them was I had military training, I had military experience, and that I was either an instructor and or an evaluator in what airplane or airplanes that I flew in the Air Force. So I don't know if that's true for all airlines. I don't know if it's true for all the different countries that hire airline pilots. So if I were you, the Marine Corps aviation is great, but if you are definitely sure that you want to become an airline pilot, I think, just my gut feeling, that taking the Air Force route would be better, because you have a lot more airframes to choose from. Their whole focus is flying airplanes, hence, Air Force, as opposed to the Marine Corps. I think things in the Marine Corps are a little bit different. You would get great experience in the Marine Corps and fly amazing airplanes. But again, it's just my gut feeling that if you were choosing between the two, if it were me, I would go with the Air Force over the Marine Corps. Now, some of you out there listening may have experience with this, or maybe have a better answer for John. So if you do, please write to me and send me some feedback. Let me know. Okay, Mike writes, greetings from Maryville, Missouri, gateway to Omaha, Kansas City, or Des Moines, depending on your heading. I had a couple of questions. Feel free to answer or ignore as you see fit. Okay, I'm going to move on to somebody else's email then. I'm just kidding. First, when I'm flying my lowly Skyhawk's a great airplane, I can hear the slightest, and I mean slightest, change in the engine. In your case, since you're sitting relatively far away from your engines, do you ever hear any untoward noises? Or do you just have to rely on gauges to tell you if something minor is going wrong? Well, usually, because, as you say, we are sitting so far away from the engines that are mounted on the tail of the airplane, usually you really can't hear anything. Sometimes on the ground you can, or you get close to reflective surfaces in buildings and stuff like that. You can kind of hear a little bit of the reflection of the sound. If you open up your window, you can, on the ground, of course, it's not recommended in flight. You can hear the engine, and I guess you could pick up on something going on that might not be good. But for the most part, you are correct in your assumption that the way that we're going to notice something is awry with one of our engines on the Mad Dog is by seeing it on our instrument panel, our engine instruments, and or our notification or enunciated system. I'm not saying that correctly. Our, like the idiot light that comes on when something's wrong. Or you might happen to notice it while looking at the engine instruments. But actually hearing it or feeling it, usually, no, you're not going to, because you're just so far away from those engines. Secondly, I know that you talk a lot about automation and how important it is to practice hand flying when possible. But does that same apply to navigation? For instance, do you ever practice a situation where, I don't know, all the electronics fail, but and he says in parentheses, in what I am realizing as I write this is probably extremely far-fetched. If all the so his question, if you have a situation where all the electronics fail, but the engines keep going, do we ever practice that? No, we don't do that. Sometimes I'll back up things and pretend that I'm flying the old technology navigation procedures that we used in the 727 and the old 737-200, etc., where you dial up the navigational aid and you look up the radial outbound and the inbound radial for the next navigation aid for that jetway, and look at your HSI display, your horizontal situation indicator, and see whether you're on course or not. But do I ever take it off the lateral navigation mode of the flight management computer and automation? No, I don't do that. I've never seen anybody else do that, but I do occasionally go through the motions just to see if I remember how to do that, because you could end up going out to the airplane and the flight management computers are both written up and they're not working, and you're still expected to fly that airplane from Atlanta to Chicago, and you'll be expected to know how to do it. So probably a good idea to kind of refresh your memory with those procedures. Now, sadly, there are a lot of guys and gals flying airplanes now that have never done that have grown up in this world of flight management systems and vertical nav and lateral navigation systems, etc. And yeah, it's going to be quite a shock, I think, to them if they ever show up to an airplane that doesn't have that capability available to them, and they're going to be expected to, I guess they could protest and say, I'm not taking it. That reminds me of a story. I was flying with a gentleman, and he had come from another airline that flew the Boeing 717, and now our airline is flying those same 717s. But anyway, we were talking about autothrottle systems, and he said that the policy at that other airline that he flew for was that you always used the autothrottle system. You would never turn off the autothrottles. I turn them off all the time. I'm not the normal Mad Dog pilot at Acme, just to be clear. But I like to use vertical speed a lot through the autoflight system. And on this airplane, you pretty much have to turn the throttles off to get the engines to idle back far enough that you can effectively use vertical speed. But I just find that it's a much smoother experience for the passengers. But a lot of people are uncomfortable with turning off the autothrottle system. But going back to the story, he said that at the previous airline, if they showed up to an airplane that had the auto throttle system written up where they couldn't use them. Of course, the airline's policy was, well, then now you can go ahead and use the airplane without the auto throttle system. But he said a lot of the pilots there would not accept the airplane. They'd say, nope, not going to do it. And I don't blame them. If you're forced by policy, by your airline, to operate the airplane in a certain way, and then all of a sudden you show up and it's not working, then you're not used to exercising the throttles that way, manually. And I can understand why some would say, nope, I'm not going to take the airplane until you fix the system. Okay, anyway, got off track there. So to your second question, Mike, no, we don't practice, at least I don't, and I've never seen it practiced by anybody else that I've flown with, doing manual navigation kind of stuff. And I want to say something that I realize that when I say, manual flying is something that we need to do more often. We need to exercise it, do it when it's appropriate, etc. I think that some of you think that I mean like flying the whole flight, not using the autopilot system. And I do not mean that. I mean, instead of turning on the automation right away after you lift off and leaving it on all the way down until you're 500 feet above the ground and then turning it off and manipulating the controls manually. I mean like flying the airplane up into the teens or maybe even the low 20s or whatever, and then on the way down, clicking the thing off, maybe going through about 15 or 10,000 feet or something, and actually manually flying the airplane in the terminal environment. But I certainly don't mean flying a hour-long flight or a 2-hour-long flight up at cruise altitude, the whole time hand flying the airplane. I don't recommend doing that. And I don't do that myself unless I have to, unless the autoflight system, the autopilot isn't working, or neither autopilot is working. And that's a very rare thing. And to go back to what I was saying before, I know people at Acme Airlines that would feel very uncomfortable about accepting an airplane that didn't have an autopilot system. So just to be clear that what I'm saying and recommending to all of those listening who are especially commercial airline pilots, take the opportunity, if you can, to click everything off earlier and actually practice your hand flying skills. Okay. Thirdly, Mike, back to Mike's email or feedback, have you ever thought about adding an FAQ to your website? Sometimes and that stands for frequently asked questions. Sometimes when you're answering questions, you've noted that you answered something similar before. Instead of having to repeat the answer, you could just say, check out FAQ number 32, for instance. And that's a great idea, Mike. Unfortunately, that would take a huge amount of time for me to do. If somebody out there wants to volunteer to make a FAQ like that, or I call it a FAQ, but FAQ, I think I've heard most people use that term. Let me know if you're volunteering to do something like that, and you have the time to do something like that. That'd be great. Or even better, I think, if you wanted to volunteer to go and say, look up all the episodes where I talked about, question number 5, and make that in the form of an FAQ. So when someone writes about, what's your favorite airplane, or what's your favorite airport, or something like that, I can say, hey, check out episode 32 at the 15-minute mark, or something like that. That would be really handy. Otherwise, it's just easier for me just to go ahead and repeat the answer because it's just too much work. It takes too much time to go back and do all that work. But that's a good idea, Mike. I really do like your idea. Okay, and then finally he writes, I've been doing some webinars lately using gotowebinar.com. I would talk for a bit, and then participants would post questions, and I would answer them. It was extremely easy to use, and I was thinking that if you ever wanted to do either a live podcast or maybe a virtual meetup, that it would be worth checking out. I will have to check that out, Mike. Thanks. I know that there are a couple of different companies that do these kind of things, and they have sometimes a limited number of seats available or spots for people, and then some have unlimited. The downside with this is that they don't offer this for free, as far as I know. I think that GoToMeeting or GoToWebinar, I think, is like there's a certain monthly charge or fee to use the service, like $50 a month, or might even be more. And I'm not sure that this would be a good way to spend the resources that I have for the show. So I don't know. I'm going to look into it, though. I think that that would be kind of fun to do sometime. All right. Well, thanks again, Mike, for your feedback. Thanks for listening, and for all of your support of the Airline Pilot Guy show. Okay. George writes, in episode 124, you talked about Amelia Rose Earhart's effort to reenact Amelia Mary Earhart's attempt to circumnavigate the globe. But you may not be aware of another person's attempt to break the record as the youngest person to achieve the same feat. Here is a link to the website of Matt Guthmiller, and he gives me the website address. Again, look for that in the show notes. It's limitlesshorizons.org. I think you and your audience may be interested in his story, and I did check it out, and it was interesting. Thanks again for all you do. Hope to meet you in Milwaukee, MKE, one of these days. Best, George. And the thing that he's talking about, it was just like literally 2 or 3 days ago when he completed this circumnavigation. And again, he is the youngest to have completed this around the world flight event. And I believe he was solo. And he's 19 years old. He's an MIT student. Again, his name is Matt Guthmiller. He did it not in a Pilatus P12 or whatever it was that Amelia Earhart used. And by the way, she just finished that feat just a few days ago as well. She did it in the Pilatus turboprop pressurized airplane that flew pretty fast and at pretty high altitudes. Well, Matt used a leased Beechcraft A36 Bonanza, which cannot go very high and is not quite as fast as that Pilatus. And he started on the 31st of May and ended July 14th on Monday this week. So I'll have a link to that again if you're interested. And then I started to think to myself, I'll bet that there may be several people who have accomplished this feat of circumnavigating the Earth, our world. And so I looked it up. Where did I go? Of course, I always find my favorite source of information, wikipedia.org. And there are several things on this page about circumnavigating the world. And of course, the first circumnavigation took place on a ship in the 16th century. 18 survivors led by Juan Sebastián Elcano of Ferdinand Magellan's Spanish expedition, which began with 5 ships and 200 men from 1519 through 1522. And they ended up, after a journey of 3 years and 1 month, getting back to Spain. These men were the first to circumnavigate the globe in a single expedition. And they have several other listings of around the world journeys via ship. And then I'm scrolling down, a lot of entries there. I'm going to head over to the aircraft because that's what we're interested in, right? This is an aviation show. The first aerial circumnavigation of the globe occurred in 1924. It took 175 days, covering 44,360 kilometers, which is 27,560 miles. And it was done by the United States Army Air Service. And then the first time it was circumnavigated on a solo effort was by Friedrich Karl von Koenig Warthausen and a Clem L.20. I'm not sure what that is. Between August 1928 and November 1929. The first, don't worry, I'm not going to list every single one of these. You can look for it yourself on the link there in the show notes for global circumnavigations. The first aerial circumnavigation by an airship, and actually it was the fastest. It set a record for the fastest aerial circumnavigation, which only took 21 days, and it was also the first circumnavigation in an airship by the LZ-127 Graf Zeppelin in 1929, piloted by Hugo Echner. And so you can read all the other attempts of the youngest solo, the youngest female, etc., etc. And so that's interesting reading, I think. All right, so let's get back here to my feedback page. So thanks, George, for pointing out the MIT student Matt, who just completed a solo navigation in a Beechcraft A36 Bonanza. Very cool. Okay. Gary writes, it seems listeners are quizzing each other lately. I would like to add my own to the list. Since your podcast is an aviation podcast, it seems only fitting that everything is aviation related, right? Well, here's the question. Okay, here's Gary's question. I should get some sound effects, but I don't have time to go get them. What is the connection between everybody's favorite song, Java Jive, and aviation? Well, Gary left me hanging. I don't know what the answer is. I will email you the answer next week. In the meantime, start submitting your answers. The listener who submits the correct answer will receive eternal glory in the Airline Pilot Guy Hall of Fame. So again, Gary's question to all of you listening. What is the connection between everybody's favorite song, Java Jive, and aviation? And by the way, Tom, if you're finished with your training and you have a moment, if you haven't already done so, please send me some email or feedback and let me know what the answer is to the airline using the Patriot call sign, because I'm not sure we answered that. Okay, let's go with AJ. He writes, something interesting happened at my local international airport yesterday. Someone smashed through a security fence at the Brisbane International Airport in a car and out onto the runways, taxiways, causing the airport to be closed while the federal police tracked them down. And then he sent me a link to the article. Let me see if I still have that article up. Yes. No, that's something else. Never mind. Okay, going back here. A woman had reportedly driven into the Brisbane Airport airfield after smashing through a fence on Tuesday night. All flights in and out of the airport were suspended for about 2 hours because of the major security breach. Australian Federal Police said that a 37-year-old woman had been taken to the hospital following the incident. And let's see. There were many media reports that multiple people were in the vehicle, and that was not true. It was just this one lady, 37 years old. Initial reports also said that the car had reached the tarmac, but Brisbane Airport later stated that the vehicle had only made it to a section of the airfield and not the runway. So anyway, here is actually AJ attached a live ATC recording about the time that this all was unfolding, and I went ahead and edited it a bit, quite a bit actually. So let's listen to a little bit of that exchange between the folks up at the Brisbane International Airport Tower and the folks coming in for landing.
1405, there is an issue on the aerodrome at the moment. Go around, maintain runway heading, climb to 4,000.
Going round, maintain runway heading, climb 4,000, velocity 1405.
It's been made, you can expect holding. I'll advise when I have further information. Okay, the update on the situation is there's some persons who were on a vehicle on the taxiway and they're now unknown position on the field. The Australian Federal Police are attempting to locate the persons. At this stage, the aerodrome is not secure for the approach. We're trying to ascertain from the safety officer when it will be open for approaches. And that's all I know at this stage. I'll update shortly.
GoCat 536, and just for our planning, we just want to ensure that the Gold Coast will be available to us if we have to divert.
Gold Coast aerodrome is available for all aircraft at this point.
GoCat 536, and if that changes in the next sort of 10 minutes, just let us know, please.
Understood. And you can let me know at your earliest discretion what your diversion time will be.
GoCat 536, okay.
There was a security breach onto the runway by persons. One has been detained, however they're still looking for the others. The Australian Federal Police have closed the Brisbane Airport until further notice. Any further updates I'll pass on this frequency.
Okay. Well, there you have it. And that's not even the entire clip that I had edited, but there's really no need to play any more of it. So looks like they apprehended the 37-year-old woman and took her to the hospital. Apparently some psychological issues, apparently. But the thing that that I take away from this incident is that even on a day like today, I mean, it was a beautiful day flying from Pensacola to Atlanta and then Atlanta to Buffalo, New York. I'm looking out the window right now. I'm sitting in front of the window at my desk, and it's just beautiful out there. Blue sky, just a gorgeous day to fly today. And so that means for many flights, or all flights domestically anyway, that you're likely not going to have any fuel on your airplane for a diversion, for an alternate, because the weather is just beautiful. And you might be flying to somewhere that has really only effectively one runway that you can use, like this Brisbane International Airport. And, well, I take that back. Brisbane might actually have more than one international runway. But, you know, you don't think about something like this happening. Or an airplane could crash on the runway. There's so many different things that can happen. And the thing that I take away from this is that you should always be thinking, okay, what if the runway closes for whatever reason and I have to go somewhere else? You know, what is my fuel state? Where am I going to go? Maybe I should be, you know, in the back of my mind thinking, what could possibly happen, you know, going into Buffalo on this beautiful day? But you know what? I might have to go over to Rochester or Syracuse, whatever. In fact, one time, this reminds me of an episode years and years and years ago when I was a 727 captain and I was flying into Buffalo. Of course, it was a different situation because we did have fuel for an alternate on board the airplane. And it was very, very windy up here, and the wind was basically out of our crosswind limits. And I know many of you are working for airlines that really don't have crosswind limits, only some guidance about the maximum demonstrated crosswind for that particular airplane that you're flying. But Acme treats those maximum demonstrated crosswinds as limits. So for us, they are limits. And it was just within limits and just out of limits, just in limits, just out of limits. And finally, every time we were getting close to that point where we were going to commit to landing, then it went out of limits. So we ended up finally going around several times and then ended up going over to Syracuse, New York, getting some more fuel, allowing the winds to die down a bit, not completely. And then we finally made it here to Buffalo. Okay, so I digress. Thinking about, you know, you're flying in an airplane, the dispatcher has gotten that fuel load down to just exactly what you need with your legal reserve, but nothing there for contingency fuel or for a destination alternate. And then all of a sudden, something like this happens. And, you know, you should be thinking about, okay, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? You know, that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy flying domestically here in the U.S. I mean, everywhere you go, you have several choices to put the airplane down on the ground, you know, if need be. Not on the ground, but on a runway somewhere. We've got lots of airports to choose from here in the United States. And that's one of the reasons why I feel a little bit uncomfortable when I fly out to places like in the Caribbean and that kind of thing, where your number of options really start, you know, decreasing rapidly. So it's still a safe operation, don't get me wrong. It's just that I feel more comfortable, you know, when I have more options. Okay, well, let's move on. enough of that. So thanks again, AJ, for sending that to me. And apparently a number of planes had to bail out and head over to the Gold Coast Airport, and that quickly became overloaded because it's not used to that level of traffic. And he writes, sounds like a late night for a lot of people, with planes being queued on the taxiways after the limited number of gates at the Gold Coast Airport became full. He says, when you finally make it to Australia, Sierra Nevada Pale Ales on me. Well, come on, if I'm in Australia, don't you have some local brews that are as good or better than Sierra Nevada, AJ? Okay, let's move on. Daniel writes, it's Daniel from Bogota, Colombia. Hope everything is good. I don't want to say Colombia. I realize now that I've made that mistake many, many times. It's Colombia. I've heard you say on the show that Acme has the MD-88 and MD-90 variants, but I was wondering if they also have the MD-81, MD-82, or the 83 variant. If so, does your type rating allow you to fly all the different variants, or do you need a different course between the oldest analog models and the newest EFIS models, electronic flight instrument display, or electronic flight instrument system? Anyway, well, we don't have those variants, and if we did, I think there's a good possibility that Acme would require us. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they would make that a separate category, like they have made the Boeing 717 a separate category because of its differences in its instrumentation and systems. So he goes on, I've read somewhere that Acme is subleasing a bunch of 717s. Does this mean that in the near future you will be flying the 717 too? Or is that one with a whole different type rating? It's one with a whole different... Actually, it's actually not a different type rating. It's the same type rating. It's just that at Acme, it is, for our practical and operational purposes, a separate category. So if, and at one time at Acme, we also flew the DC-9. So if you flew the DC-9 or the MD-88 or the MD-90 or now the Boeing 717, all of us on our what we like to call our license, our little credit card sized thing with our certifications, you would see under the type ratings DC-9. But as I mentioned before, I've never actually flown a DC-9. Actually, I do. I fly the DC-9-88 and the DC-9-90. But they changed the way they named the airplanes at various times. And I've talked about that on earlier shows. So speaking purely technically, would the type ratings be different? No. But would they be separate categories at Acme? Yes. So right now at Acme, or at one point, we had the DC-9, separate category. 88 and 90, that's the same category, but they're different from the DC-9. And then yet again another category, the Boeing 717. Now, some have said that if we go through with this cockpit update, this modernization update, and put in the big panel glass displays on the 88 and the MD-90, would we now then be a common category with the Boeing 717? Could be. I'm not sure. The folks in the training department at Acme, in conjunction and collaboration with the FAA, would take a look at it, see what would need to be changed for the training program, etc., and decide whether or not if we could operate it as a common category or just keep it separate. I know that was kind of a muddy answer, but that's the best I can do. And then, Daniel writes, what about the DC-9? Oh, sorry. Were they flown by the other company's crews before or after the merger, or all along, or did pre-merger Acme people fly them too? Well, both. The pre-merger Acme, whether they were from the one airline or the other, both airlines flew the DC-9 at various times. So, and again, separate category. Okay, hope that made sense, Daniel. If not, send me some more feedback. And thanks, as always, for listening and sending in your feedback. Carlos sent me some audio feedback. Great. Here we go.
Hello, Captain Jeff. It's Carlos here from the Plain Talking UK podcast studio. Just sending you some voice feedback and a few questions. If you could answer them, would be awesome. As always, thanks for creating a fantastic podcast. I'm midway through episode 124 at the moment. Nearly finished that, got to finish that off this afternoon. So I have a few questions for you. Hopefully you can answer them. I'm sure you can. First one is regarding air conditioning on aircraft. We recently flew back from Lucca Airport in Malta back to the UK. Before we took off from Lucca, it was a hot morning, quite a warm morning, about 28 degrees Celsius outside. So fairly warm on the tarmac, and once inside the aircraft, noticed that the air conditioning blowers above our heads were pumping out just warm air. Just wondered whether this was due to the air conditioning packs not being on, or not possibly not working, or whether Ryanair were just trying to save money by not actually having the air conditioning on. As I've flown many airlines before, such as Emirates, and the air that you get out of the blowers above your head has always been freezing cold. Anyway, next question for you is when you do ferry flights to bring empty aircraft from point A to point B with no passengers on board, just yourselves pilots, do you have the flight deck door open? Because as we all know that when you have passengers in the back, that door is firmly closed. Just wonder whether you have that door open, being there's no one in the aircraft apart from you guys. Next one is about Acme. Do your bosses at Acme know you do the podcast, and do your bosses listen to your podcast, and do they give you any feedback at all? Just wondered about that. So there's a few questions for you then for the next show, Jeff, and hope you're well, and everyone in the family is doing well. And I'm going to leave you to get on with the show now. Now coming up to 3 minutes, so I've got to get away before it cuts out. So thanks again for creating a brilliant show, Jeff, and hope to have you on our show soon for another episode. That'd be awesome. Okay then, take care, Jeff, and clear skies, unlimited visibility, and as always, tailwinds. Bye, Jeff.
Thank you, Carlos. And speaking of brilliant podcasts, Carlos and his co-pilot, Simon, or co-host, Simon, put on a wonderful podcast over there in the UK called the Plain Talking UK podcast. And you can find that at plaintalkinguk.com. And I was privileged to be, and honored to be, a guest on one of their episodes a while back. And Carlos, I look forward to being on your show again sometime. And by the way, this is a busy time of year for Carlos and Simon because they cover a lot of the air shows going on. And apparently in the UK, this time of year is like when they have a huge number of air shows going on. And I was just listening to one of their last episodes, and they were talking about going to the RIAT, what was that, Royal Air Show International Tattoo or something, I don't know, RIAT. You heard Sean McCarney mention RIAT as well in that interview that I did with Sean. And I even received a text message from Carlos and Simon. I think they were in a car in some horrible traffic, I think heading to RIAT. And so if you want to hear what they thought about that air show, make sure you tune in to their brilliant podcast, plaintalkinguk.com. And I believe they're also heading to Farnborough, and I've asked them to perhaps send me some audio feedback from there as well. So let's get on with your questions, Carlos. The air conditioning, your experience at Malta with the hot air. Okay, so in general, when you're hot in the back of the airplane and you feel the air coming out of the air vents and the air is not ice cold, that's usually because they're using an external source for their air conditioning, and sometimes that external source of air just isn't up to snuff, and it's not providing that nice, really, really super cooled air into the airplane, or maybe by the time it's getting, all through the ducting and everything else, it's getting heated up and it's coming out a little bit on the warm side above you. By the way, 28 Celsius is about 82 degrees Fahrenheit. For those of you who don't know what 28 degrees Celsius feels like, again, that's about 82 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's warm, and actually in an aluminum tube or aluminium tube on the tarmac of an airport in sunshine, even on a cold day, can get kind of warm and uncomfortable inside. But I digress. We like to keep the cabin cool and comfortable in the summer months, and warm and comfortable in the winter months. And if we have an operating auxiliary power unit, especially in the summertime, and that external source of conditioned air, it just is not hacking it, then we'll start up the auxiliary power unit, the APU, and run the air conditioning packs using the bleed air extracted from the APU, and that usually does a pretty good job of keeping the airplane cool. Now, there are even, depending on the airplane, there are some times on some very, very hot days that even with all the external air on the airplane and the auxiliary power unit running, using all of the air conditioning packs that you have on your airplane, even then, sometimes it's just not good enough to keep up with the overwhelming heat. And so we all are sitting in there sweating. And trust me, if you're in the back, in the cabin, and you are hot and you're perspiring, I'm up in the front, and it's like a hothouse up there, a greenhouse, because we have a lot more glass all around us. And trust me, it's going to be hotter where I am than where you are in the back. And we're not doing it to save money. At least I certainly won't be. Now, I've been in situations at Acme where a well-intentioned pilot crew will have waited a very long time to start up the auxiliary power unit to power the air conditioning packs, and it was getting very, very uncomfortable in the back of the airplane, but they were thinking that they were doing the company a service by saving a couple extra gallons of fuel, because fuel is not cheap. But my philosophy has always been, keep my customers, my passengers, comfortable. And if it means spending a couple extra bucks, yeah, I know it adds up over time. But to me, that experience is probably going to, mean that these people are going to, if they have a bad experience, they're never going to fly Acme again. Or if they have a good experience, they're going to go, hey, these folks do their best to keep things all nice and cool. Now, for those of you who are thinking, that we, if we get a long delay and we turn everything off to save fuel, that's ridiculous. Again, we're in there with you, right? It's not like we're going away from the airplane and going inside the terminal building or something in nice cold air while you are cooking on the tarmac. We're out there with you. And so if you're uncomfortable, chances are we're just as uncomfortable as you are. And we want things to cool us down as well. So, but again, my guess, going back to Carlos, your comment about the hot air coming through the vents, my guess is that they were using the whatever source of air coming from an external source, and it just wasn't cutting the conditions, the climate conditions there at Malta. And if they hadn't working auxiliary power unit, I don't know. There's no way for me to know if they did or not. If they did have one, they should have elected to go ahead and spend a little extra money and start it up and keep you nice and cool. So that's the best I can do with that one. Ferry flights, great question. Do you have the flight deck door open? Okay, when he's saying ferry flight, some airlines call them repos, or for reposition, where it's just the two pilots, or sometimes two pilots and maybe some flight attendants as well, taking an airplane from point A to B without any passengers. And in that case, when it's all just airline folks, Acme Airlines folks, we can leave the door open. Which is, and a lot of times I've ferried airplanes when it's just been the co-pilot and I. which is really odd when you two are the only ones on the airplane. And usually we'll try to keep that door open, but we have this folding bifold door that when the airplane pitches or rolls or whatever, it kind of, and it's a very heavy door, it's a reinforced door since 9/11, that it'll kind of roll on its own closed. And so usually when that happens, we just leave it closed because it's too much of a hassle to try to turn around and open the thing back up again. But when we do have it open, it's kind of odd because, things sound a little bit different because when you don't have that door closed, it's just a different sound. It's a different feel. You hear things that you normally wouldn't hear in the cabin, again, because you have the door shut and it acts as a sonic barrier. It's just strange to kind of look back in the back and you can see the aisle and the seats in the back and, again, hear all those noises you're not used to hearing. So it just depends on the crew, I guess, whether or not they keep the door open or closed. It really doesn't matter. It's not a requirement to keep it closed. Now, if we are chartering on a charter flight and we have passengers on board, even if it's not a scheduled flight, it used to be where we could keep that door open and have people come up and visit us in the cockpit, etc. But that all changed after 9/11. And now when we do charter flights, we have to keep that door closed as well. All right, and finally, do my bosses at Acme, do they know that I'm doing this podcast? And if so, do they ever give me feedback? Well, let me answer the last part first. I've not ever received any feedback from any of my bosses at Acme, so I'm hoping that they don't know that I do this podcast. They might. It's one of those questions I don't really want to know the answer to, because I don't want to be constantly thinking, I wonder if they're listening and if I said the right thing. Although I really do always have that in the back of my mind, so that when I make any kind of representations about my company, even indirectly, I want to make sure that I don't say something that's going to get me in trouble. And that's the whole point of me saying that I fly for Acme and not my blank airline that I really fly for. And so to answer, no, I don't know whether the chief pilots or anybody in upper level management know that I do this show. And I've never received any feedback from them. And I hope that I'm doing a good enough job that they're happy with the way I'm representing the company, even though I'm not really representing the company, and that I'm not saying anything until. And trust me, the airline that I fly for is one of the top airlines in the world, and I'm very proud to be a pilot for this airline and an employee of this airline. And I would be happy to represent them in any way, but the way I have it arranged right now, I think is the best way to do it. I think that most of you know the real airline I fly for, but I think it's just best to leave it this way. So, hope that answered all your questions, Carlos. And thanks again for taking the time to send the audio feedback. I do appreciate it. I know you're very busy. All right, we're almost at the 2-hour point, and you all are sending me so much darn feedback. I'm never going to be able to catch up. I know, it's partly my fault I talk too much. I'm getting hungry, even though I had that wonderful lunch with Tiffany earlier. It's been several hours, and it's getting to be a little bit later. And I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and take a break. And I'm probably going to have to, I don't know, maybe I'll try to finish this when I get back from grabbing a quick bite to eat. Or maybe I'll just have to wait till I get back home and finish it up at the Airline Pilot Guy home studio, Studio 1, in the man cave. So we'll see. So for now, I'm going to go ahead and pause, and I'll be back to finish up more of your feedback.
Good day.